In this video, I'm going to share the top 5 mistakes I made when buying my first buy-to-let property, and obviously tips how you can avoid those as well. Things that obviously, if I would have known at the time, would have saved me in excess of about £3,000 and might have saved me about 7 to 8% return on my investment. That's how much this was impacted by this. So let me run through this with you in my video on in what ways on my first buy-to-let property I fucked up. To give you the rundown, I'm 28 years old. I work in the property industry, bought my first rental property now about 1-2 years ago. But yeah, in essence, I travelled up north, obviously bought my first rental property, screwed up, things weren't perfect, and here I am now creating this video. So mistake number 1, know your time frames. So call it maybe a little bit of stupidity. I was just incredibly patient, incredibly understanding. I should have been sort of a lot more on top of things. In reality, things took far too long with the mortgage lender. They dragged their heels in terms of issuing an offer, and I should have taken action sooner. So what actually happened? A couple of years ago in March, when the base rate was about 4%, my application went into a lender. They came back and said they wanted a survey doing on the property. When that came up, obviously what you've got to do is you've got to find a company to carry out the survey. They've got to be obviously paid. They've got to do the survey at a time when they're available. But then you've got to liaise with the seller as to when they'd be available to obviously let them in to carry out whatever survey is needed. That will get sent over to the lender. They'll look through the report and see what their thoughts are. After this, there was a comment on there about another part of the house where they requested another survey, basically. Before issuing a mortgage offer, they needed certain work to be carried out with the property. And then obviously the downside being is with carrying out the work, the seller can choose to carry out the work, pay for it himself to sell the property. He can choose to back out of the deal and obviously look to find another buyer. Or the alternative being is I could pay for the works, but the risk is always that obviously he can pull out of the deal once the works are done and I've paid for it all and I lose out on that money. In reality, what this survey meant and then another survey meant, obviously all of this dealing with it, correspondence, it actually meant around about June time, I still didn't have an offer from the lender to say they'd be willing to lend the money. In the end, what I did was I said, I'm not going with this lender anymore, I'm going to apply for another one. So I applied for a new lender on the Monday. On the Thursday, the same week, I had an offer letter through from that lender. So what had taken 3-4 months with one had taken a few days with another. Now at this point, I was about £500-600 deep in surveys. The base rate had increased from 4% to 5%, and that obviously meant my mortgage payments were going to be higher. So they actually worked out to about £30 a month higher, which I know isn't the end of the world, but when you are dealing with rental properties, obviously you're looking at your return on investment. It did have an impact. So all in all, wasted time, wasted money, and a higher monthly payment. I'd say that's a pretty big screw up. There are ways that you can avoid this. So firstly, speaking to your mortgage advisor, they'll have an idea of which mortgage lenders might be a bit more simple, which ones are going to be more complex, which ones are going to be quicker, which ones are going to be potentially a little bit slower. So it's all about picking the right mortgage lender from the start. And the main other bit of that is, unlike me, not waiting as long as I did to pull the cord and move on if you felt like it's something that's needed. Another thing that you can do is be more prepared. So what you can do first of all is have a decision in principle in place before you view properties. But not only does this show to buyers that you're serious, but it also gives you that peace of mind that things will be that little bit more straightforward if obviously you do find the property that you want to purchase. In terms of preparation as well, it's all a matter of having the documents ready as and when they're needed. So whenever someone emails you for certain documents, you get those over to them as soon as possible and even have everything ready in advance that you know you're going to need. Keeping all lines of communication open, so solicitors, estate agents, just making sure that the communication is, if anything, over the top, just so obviously everyone is kept in the loop and everything is as up to date as it can be. And now for mistake number 2, so not checking out the more expensive things that could go wrong. So this could be anything from structural, so subsidence, cracks, looking at the roof in a little bit more detail, all down to flood and water damage, electrical and plumbing issues. There's a lot of different areas you can look at. There's even less common stuff such as Japanese knotweed, asbestos, but there are a lot of areas that can add up very quickly. So what went wrong for me? The boiler. So that was about £2,300 of an expense that I did not need, did not want. One handy tip that I did have for viewing properties is obviously if you don't know anything about boilers, making sure you're taking a picture of the boiler model number when you're going around so you can get an idea of how old the boiler is. That's exactly what I did in that circumstance, but there are areas that I could have obviously improved on that, consider it went bang. So how can you avoid this? Take pictures, take video of everything that you're looking at in the property, because the main thing is later on you can Google it, you can look it up, you can do your research, you can ask people, and that allows you to have a good understanding of any potential issues, because you're not going to remember everything. The main thing for me with the boiler is, although I did take a picture of the model number, I didn't look at it in enough detail, and if I looked at the boiler in a little bit more detail, I would have seen that it was quite rusted, and it did look like on the inside it was obviously on its way out, but there's no way of me having known that unless I looked at it much closer. Just taking the time when looking through Zoopla, Rightmove, looking through the listing, you'll be able to potentially spot where there's been previous damp, where there currently is damp. Arriving to viewings 10-15 minutes early just to take a good look at the roof, take a good look at the guttering just from down, obviously ground level. It's not always the easiest to see, but obviously you'll have a lot more information by having looked at that rather than not. Obviously, if you ever did want that extra peace of mind before buying a house, you can always carry out a survey where obviously a professional will go out, inspect it, check it, just to give you that extra level of peace of mind. So mistake number 3, not sweating the small stuff. So when I bought the property, naturally I was excited. I wanted to get the process started, but there were a couple of upgrades that I wanted to make, but not immediately, within 1 to 2 years, let's say. One of which being upgraded the fence, because believe it or not, I do want to provide a good place to live for the tenants that live in there. Believe it or not, during the tenancy, those things did end up actually going wrong. So as an example, we had a particularly big storm that ended up wiping out the fence just because of the wind. So it meant obviously people had to go out there, quote, replace it, get it sorted. And in the end, that was probably more hassle than if I just got it done at the start. Probably cost me more as well. So the main thing being is there's a lot of ways you can obviously direct your energy. Just get it sorted at the start, because it will probably save you a lot of time and effort later on. So mistake number 4, I wasn't pessimistic enough with my figures. So what you're going to find is you'll have your idea of how much of things are going to cost, you'll have your idea as to how long things are going to take. In reality, it's going to cost more, it'll probably take longer as well. So you always want to have a little bit of a buffer. Some people do tend to say, depending on how accurate you feel like your estimates are going to be, maybe to add 10-20% on top of what you think it's going to cost. But obviously there are a lot of costs that you do need to factor in. You're not an expert on everything, so there'll be certain things where you might have to replace, as an example, a consumer unit just so it's legal and compliant to rent out. That set me back £1,100-1,200. There's other costs to obviously factor in, such as the utilities, the water, the electric, when you initially buy the property before it's rented out. There's the time before it's going to be rented. So you'll buy it, you're not necessarily going to have tenants move in straight away. So there might be a month, 2 months where the property doesn't have anyone living there. And then there's also obviously taxes that you've got to pay. These all eat into your returns, and they'll obviously all affect your return on investment, the expenses you pay. It'll all have an impact. And mistake number 5, that being not having the right people in place. So what you want is you want to have your dream team ready to go. So your lettings agents who are good, who can look after your tenants properly, down to your contractors where you want to make sure they're looking after your property in a way that's safe, that's compliant. They're looking after it properly, making it look nice, a nice place to live, clean. And that's obviously the main thing that you want, but also you don't want to use someone that potentially you're being overcharged by. There are obviously ways you can avoid this. If the property is local to you, obviously you can use recommendations from family, from friends, you can use people you know and trust. On the flip side of things, you can obviously, if the property is not local to you, which is kind of what happened in my circumstance, you can look at Google, you can look at Trustpilot, you can get a few quotes from different contractors as well in order to be able to compare those prices effectively. The main thing for me now is obviously building those relationships where I bought my current property, because in essence in the future when I do go to buy more, it means I've got those relationships established, and if anything does ever come up, I've got the right people ready to go to make things as straightforward for me as possible. There is so much more to property, but those are my main mistakes, those are my screw-ups. If you have any experiences, any tips that you feel like will be beneficial and helpful, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Or is the buy-to-let dream not quite for you yet? Please be sure to like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. In the next couple of months, I will be viewing and buying another property, so I'll definitely be sharing that on this channel. But thank you so much for watching. If you do want to look at the next steps or other ways that can help you achieve your buy-to-let goals, be sure to check out this video, because every little step, every obstacle you can remove to help you towards those goals will get you that one step closer. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.